This is not a healing pool. By Grupe Horror. I live near a healing spring. It's famous around the world. You may have heard of it. Then again, maybe not. It's a well-known tourist trap about half an hour away from my house by car, so I can go there any time I like. Others have spent their entire lives saving up, dreaming of going there, hoping to heal their terminal illness or broken body after hearing a story on the news or from a website. And it works. Not all the time, of course, but every once in a while, someone steps into the little lake and comes out completely healed. X-rays and CAT scans, MRIs and ultrasounds, they confirm the impossible. The doctors will even tell them, this is a miracle. The church will be notified, and it gets put into writing that a person was supernaturally healed. These types of documented events are extremely rare. Each miracle is closely followed up on, and if the healing isn't permanent, it is no longer considered a miracle. But that's never happened to my knowledge. Whatever goes on down there, under the murky mineral water, it sticks. The thing is, I've always been suspicious of the world-famous healing spring. The church is so secretive about it, they refuse to allow any scientific experiments to be done on the water or the soil there. This, despite the fact that everything from cancer to MS to bone degeneration had been cured by the mystery water. They've owned the land for centuries. I asked permission once to take some scuba gear into the water and try and run some tests, and they refuse vehemently. Even under supervision, they won't allow any sort of exploration. Security guards patrol the shore, and bags are inspected upon entering, so there's no way to sneak my equipment in during the day when the place is open. But I thought of another way. I suppose I should explain why I'm so curious. Why I don't just trust the priests when they say it was simply God healing the sick with his divine power. I believe that's possible, mind you, but that's not what's happening here. When I was 8 years old, we went to visit the healing spring with my uncle. He had suffered from Parkinson's disease for years, and they thought perhaps he could be cured through the divine power of the pool. His entire body was shaking, and he had stepped into the water with tentative, quivering strides. But when he emerged from the pale blue lake, he was a different man. As he swam into the deepest part of the water, I saw his head go under and his eyes widened in surprise. It looked like someone had grabbed him by the ankle and pulled him under. When he came back up, he looked different. He came forth from the beach on sturdy legs, his gait sure and purposeful. I saw him walk right up to my mother and look her dead in the eyes, his face slack and expressionless. I'm fixed, he had said, with a total lack of joy or enthusiasm. Let's get out of this place. As he spoke, I thought to myself, this man is not my uncle anymore. But of course my mum refused to believe it. She figured he was the same old Uncle Dan, only healed. I told her that Uncle Dan was in trouble. He was still at the bottom of the lake. This new man, the new Uncle Dan, said not to be silly, and that he was standing right there in front of me. But when he spoke, his eyes flashed with something evil and full of hate for me at having spoken. They flickered pale blue for a second, like a second eyelid blinking sideways, then back to brown. He winked at me and smiled, and I saw his tongue now looked far too big for his mouth. It was bunched up and folded over, crammed into his maw like dinner leftovers in a bowl too small to hold them. His yellow smoke-stained teeth were now white as snow, and he grinned widely, showing them to me. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I knew it was true. I was just lying to myself because I was scared. Who am I kidding? I was fucking petrified. The new Uncle Dan was not a nice man. Whereas my old uncle had sung and joked and danced on his wobbly legs, this man was serious, mean, and quick to anger. If I dropped something or took too long to get him a drink, he was always thirsty now, he would turn bright red and scream at me in a deep and terrible voice. "Hurry up, you little shit. What the fuck is taking your stupid ass so long?" He would yell and scream and curse. He never joked anymore. Before that, he always had a joke or two. My mum stopped visiting him after a few months, and then pretty soon they barely spoke. But she never admitted I had been right. She stubbornly insisted that this doppelganger, this imposter, was still her brother. He had to be. I knew she was wrong, and worse yet, I had a feeling, a very overwhelming inkling, that Uncle Dan was still down at the bottom of that lake. It was like he was calling out to me for help from down there. If I could only find his body, I could prove the man wasn't really him, that he'd simply stolen my uncle's life. So one night, when I was in my late 20s, full of pride and fearlessness, I made my way over to the property. I had all my gear, my flippers, wetsuit, air tank, regulator, hoses, a waterproof camera, flashlight, and everything else I needed. I had been preparing for years to do this. I drove past the gated entrance a little ways and parked at the side of the road in the tall grass. I got out of my car and made my way through the forest towards the little lake. The night sky was clear and cloudless. The full moon shone up above and lit my path as I walked through the brush. I had to hide once or twice when I saw the flashlight beams of security guards patrolling the area, but kept moving again once they had passed by. I slipped through the woods as quickly and quietly as I could, making my way towards the healing pool further within the property. The security guards were everywhere, dozens of them. Why did they need such protection for a little lake, I wondered. It only convinced me further that something sinister was happening here. After a few close calls, once nearly walking right into a guard and only avoiding detection just barely, I reached the water's edge. The surface was still and black, reflecting a mirror image of the stars and moon above. I saw something move in the water, and then it disappeared a second later. Probably just a fish or a frog, I thought to myself. I put on my equipment, still hiding at the edge of the forest next to the water. After a few moments of gathering my courage, I stepped into the inky black water. It was thick with minerals and difficult to see. I took out my flashlight and turned it on. The visibility was still poor, but slightly better now. I kicked my legs and was propelled forward into the depths, my flippers making the work easy. I'm not sure exactly what I was expecting to find down there, but I definitely wasn't expecting what I saw next. Those look like giant figs, I remember thinking to myself. Have you ever eaten a fig? You know, when you cut one open and inside are all those little tiny alien-looking finger hairs? Like cilia on a microscope cell, but larger. They group together like a mouth in the middle. That's what I saw. There were dozens of them, and they dotted the floor of the lake. They opened up like flowers blooming as I approached, and at the center of each large fig mouth was a white bulb the size of a cantaloupe. They appeared to be plants growing on the bottom of the lake, but they were massive, over 15 feet tall. I had never seen anything like them before in my life. They were purple and gold and moved as if they were alive. As I got closer, I saw strange vines as well, coiled like snakes at the base of each plant. I swam down to look and saw they were moving around like snakes. The white bulb at the center of the plant closest to me moved suddenly. I was far too close to it, I realized too late, my heart pounding with fear. The white round thing rotated downwards, and I saw what looked like eyes staring at me from it. I couldn't pry my eyes away, despite my rising terror. I looked closer and realized whose eyes they were. It was Uncle Dan, only his face was pale and bloated. His brown eyes were wide and afraid, just as they looked that day when he went under the water and disappeared almost 20 years before. His entire body was enveloped in the cilia of the thing's mouth. He looked like he had been swallowed alive by the disgusting purple fig plant. The little finger hairs moved around his head and wiggled around with sudden activity. They fluttered up and down and seemed to draw him back in as he struggled. His head wriggled and squirmed, and I saw he was still fighting to get free. He was alive. Nearly 2 decades later, he was still alive. I saw his bloated face was covered in fibrous plant material, which made it impossible for him to scream or open his mouth. The plant was feeding him oxygen and nutrients, I realized. It was keeping him alive. But why? I felt something wrapping around my ankles and looked down with increasing fear. I was pulled down suddenly, and I saw a long vine had ensnared my leg like a boa constrictor. Not good. Not good at all. I looked and saw it was pulling me in towards the open mouth of one of the giant purple figs. This one looked younger and slightly smaller. I got the feeling when it got me in its clutches, it would hold me in its terrifying mouth forever, just like my Uncle Dan. And not only that, but there would suddenly be a new me created, a meaner, thirstier me. My thoughts raced and I suddenly remembered my knife. I managed to grab it as the vine dug deeper into my leg. I could feel it squeezing my bones and crushing my body tissues with its powerful grip. I reached down and slashed at the vine with my blade, cutting shallow gashes into the tough skin of the thing. Its grip stayed firm and it didn't relent. With increasing horror, I realized it was wrapping itself even more tightly around my ankle and squeezing tighter and tighter. I began to feel pins and needles in my foot. I reached down again, and this time I tried to saw with the blade, running my knife back and forth quickly and ineffectively as panic began to take hold of me. Fear swelled and grew within me as I saw the monstrous plant was very close now, its alien mouth opening and closing, the cilia moving around with anticipation as if the thing were licking its lips with hunger. This one did not have a white bulb at its center. It wanted me for that coveted place. I sawed with the knife, harder and quicker, my heart beating fast and heavy in my chest, loud enough I could hear it in my ears. The pain in my leg was incredible. The thing felt like it was made of stone. I hacked and dug with the pointed tip of the blade and tried fruitlessly to gain purchase on the writhing tentacle. The knife slipped and skidded painfully into my skin, causing me to wince in sudden sharp pain of another variety. Another vine came up and began to pull at my mask, trying to rip it off my face. I slashed and hacked with the knife and managed to cut off a piece of this thinner vine, and it retreated, but several others began to approach from the depths. This was not going well. The agony in my ankle and foot grew until it went completely numb, as the pins and needles sensation went away to be replaced by a heavy pressure pain. I pictured my foot turning increasingly darker shades of purple. At that moment, I was beyond desperate. The pain in my leg was worse than anything I had ever thought possible, and my hacking and sawing at the vine was making no progress. I took a deep breath and began to saw at my own leg, rather than the tentacle that had ensnared it, making quick progress on the flesh below the kneecap. Compared to the vine, my leg made for easy work. The knife cut through the skin and tendon like it was tough steak. The pain was terrible, but the idea of getting free was better, and I continued sawing, biting down on the regulator mouthpiece and trying desperately to keep breathing. I reached bone and continued to saw with the serrated parts of the blade. I was making tiny bits of progress and starting to become slightly hopeful when one of the vines pulled off my face mask and another yanked the regulator out of my mouth. I managed to get one last good breath in before my air source was pulled away. I held my breath and swung the knife wildly, trying to scare the tentacles off, then went back to my leg. I was through the bone, finally. My hand continued to saw through the other side, and I felt a huge weight drop off below me as my dismembered foot fell down into the depths. Kicking with my one remaining leg, I swam up to the surface. The other vines brushed against me as I escaped, but I managed to get away without any of them managing to grab me. I got up to the surface of the water and took huge, gasping breaths of fresh air. My legs screamed in agony and I struggled towards the beach. When I got there, several security guards were waiting for me. I got the impression they had no idea what happened beneath the lake at the bottom. They were simply hired goons. Their faces regarded me with pity as I coughed up water from my lungs and screamed in pain. "You lose your other leg?" one of them asked dully. Luckily, they felt bad for me and dialed 911 before calling their bosses. I managed to escape from the place in the back of an ambulance and wound up in a nearby hospital on the trauma unit there. I was there for over 3 months. After multiple surgeries, they managed to make a stump that could be fitted for a prosthesis. The nurses and doctors were amazing, giving me encouragement and support as I made my healing journey, as they called it. I guess I shouldn't laugh. It really was a trip. I worked with the prosthesists and occupational therapists, physiotherapists and orthopedic surgeons, rehab specialists, and finally, outpatient treatment clinics. It was at one of my infrequent visits to one of these clinics recently that something happened which prompted me to write this. I was sitting on the steel table in the examination room, trying not to slide off and tumble down to the floor as the disposable paper covering slipped beneath me. The occupational therapist walked in with her student at her side. They regarded me for a moment and looked at their clipboard together as one. Their eyes looked up to me from the clipboard, 2 pairs together at the same time. Their eyelids didn't close, but I saw them blink a second set of eyes, sideways. The irises flickered pale blue for just a second, and they smiled at me. "What are you doing here?" the occupational therapist asked me. "Didn't you hear about the healing spring? It's very close. We can show you." Her long tongue slipped out of her mouth as she spoke, and she poked it back in. A thick purple and gold vine. I just want to thank Jordan Group Horror for allowing me to narrate that story. Please show the author some love. I'll leave a link for the original story in the description below. Jordan Group Horror also has a YouTube channel, so I will leave a link for their channel in the description below. If you're not already subscribed to them, definitely go check them out. If you liked what you heard here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare. The jungle I'm guarding is hiding a terrible secret. My brave audience 5469. Hey, Logan. Hey, wake the fuck up before Cap smokes both our asses. This rude awakening was paired with increasingly desperate kicks against my boots. I looked up to the perpetrator disturbing my first slumber in 2 days, my head heavy with half-forgotten dreams. I didn't have time to get angry at Jake for this betrayal. I could hear the unmistakable thud of boots ascending the stairs. They were quick, too. However, I'm quicker. I was already back on my feet and facing out towards the sector of jungle assigned to our tower. My rifle braced into my armpit and head on a swivel looking for any bump in the night. "Private Murphy, I trust you've properly adjusted to night watch now." Captain Harrison didn't attempt to conceal the joy he took in running me ragged this last week. He had caught me dozing off and had made it his mission to, in his words, reform me into a proper soldier. My life was now patrolling the perimeter of this jungle from dawn till dusk, followed by spending my nights staring into a mess of tree trunks, leaves and vines. I responded in the best reformed soldier voice I could muster. "Sir, yes sir, I've taken quite a liking to it. Reminds me of hunting back home, sir." "Well, that's good to hear, Private. There is one thing bothering me, though." Captain Harrison placed his fist under his chin and looked contemplatively out into the night. I was looking over here from the East Tower a few minutes ago and only saw Private Jake Mendez here on watch." Jake and I went rigid, our breaths caught in our throats, bracing ourselves for the chewing out of a lifetime. However, Captain Harrison just stood there looking at us, smiling. A sadistic twinkle shone brightly in his eyes. "I'm very impressed with you, Mendez," Harrison beamed. Standing at full attention, Jake gulped and glanced towards me for a moment before turning his head forward again. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So impressed, in fact. I'll have you join Private Murphy here for all his duties the next 2 weeks." Captain Harrison's smile was shining brighter than ever. "Think of it as a mentorship program to help mould him into a soldier such as yourself." I could hear Jake's teeth grinding before he spat out his response. "Sir." Captain Harrison took 2 quick steps towards me and stood before me with his nose practically touching mine, the violent change in his demeanour marked by the vein bulging from his forehead. "I reckon you thought you had gotten a shit deal when you got sent here," Harrison barked into my face. "But I assure you, it can be worse, Private." Harrison didn't bother waiting for my response. He stormed down the steps back to the centre of the base, probably already eyeing the next victim of his power trip. "Shit, I'm sorry, man." My platitudes were cut off by Jake socking me in the ribs. I doubled over, clutching my side after the well-deserved blow. "You fucking idiot. This detail is bad enough, and now I'm double fucked for the crime of being around you," Jake snarled at me. After a beat, I caught my breath. "Shit, man, that's always been a risk when you hang out with me. You've known that since basic." Jake cursed some more under his breath and turned back towards the jungle. I didn't blame him for not wanting to even look at me. I fished around in my pocket for a moment before offering an apology cigarette. He snatched it greedily. Jake's been trying to quit the cancer sticks, another downside of hanging out with a screw-up like me. He wasn't wrong though. This was a terrible detail to get sent to. At first, I thought it was like any of the other deserts I'd been sent to. Except when our transport plane touched down on that sweltering runway, we didn't drive off towards some village or city, waiting for us to liberate it. No, our whole convoy instead pointed itself towards nothing but endless sand and drove. A whole 16 hours of driving left anything resembling civilization far, far behind us. All to arrive at something that still makes no sense, despite having spent the last month living in it. A jungle. A jungle that seems to have sprung out of these barren sands overnight. From my daily patrols, I'd estimate it's 3 miles wide by 4 miles long, and according to past satellite images, it didn't exist a month ago. Its presence isn't the only odd thing about it. The various flora that compose it are bizarre as well. Not alien, but they are what I'd describe as crude approximations of the plants we know. They'd fit right into the uncanny valley of plants, if that's something that exists. Trees resembling palms, with their leaves laid out like a spiral staircase ascending the trunk. Vines that twist into knots in exact intervals along their length. Singular flowers with no visible stem resting on the ground that grow to the size of an entire bush, and each petal a distinct colour from the rest. There's a crazy bastard deployed out here with us who claims he ate something that resembled a pear, but grew in the ground like a carrot and tasted like a lemon. I told him he'd better keep that info to himself unless he wants one of the lab coats that we're protecting out here to dissect him like a frog. Speaking of lab coats, that's our real job out here. Uncle Sam has subsidised this place as a research centre and grabbed ologists from every field of study you can imagine. Every bit of info they can glean from this kaleidoscope of plants is the sole property of the United States. I'm sure the powers that be in this country got some nice, shiny missiles in exchange for their cooperation. Still, Grunts like us are needed to hold down the fort and dispatch prying eyes with extreme prejudice. Though I said every type of ologist can be found here, there is one type missing: zoologists, on account of there not being a single animal to find in this place, not even an ant. Believe me, I've become so bored out here, I've started turning over leaves to see if there's a bug on the other side. Neither I nor the lab coats have had any luck in that endeavour. I know this because despite being heavily discouraged from doing so, I chat up the researchers when the opportunity arises. If I'm going to be here for who knows how long, I'd like to know why. I've become chummy with one of the many botanists out here. His name is Floyd, and we often meet up in the chow hall, which is just a glorified extra-large tent pitched in the mud near the centre of our base. We got to talking about baseball first. We're both Dodgers fans, but soon he started letting bits slip about what they were finding out about this place. Most of it flew over my D average in high school head. Some of it has stood out though. Floyd says that despite how green many of the plants and trees are, they don't have a drop of chlorophyll in them. So they started checking the soil to see if they were getting nutrients from the ground. Nope. The mud and dirt in this place are just as devoid of nutrients as the sand surrounding us. Floyd could go on for hours about these things, and he always starts to stray towards the topic I really want to know about: the centre of this jungle. This place does have a centre, but it's above my clearance to go there. A giant dome tent, about 300 feet across, was erected in the middle of this jungle before I ever got here. It's fenced off and only accessible to the head researchers and top brass. Floyd always stops himself before spilling anything about what goes on in there. He's only ever said, "This is going to change everything." Change is the most fitting word for this place. Whether patrolling the perimeter or watching from one of the interior watchtowers, I always find some fern, bush or tree I haven't seen before. I've brought it up with Floyd, and his theory for it left me unsettled in a way that's hard to describe. This jungle is like a kid's Lego set, and this kid is trying every combination of pieces they can to see what works. Floyd never elaborates on what this place is trying to get to work, and I don't think I want him to. Never thought I'd find myself thinking this much about plants, but it helps pass the time waiting for the sun to come back up while staring at the silent jungle. After a few more apology cigarettes, the sun started to seep through the leaves and our relief arrived to take over the post. Harrison wasn't so cruel as to deny me sleep as well as food, so Jake and I made our way over to the chow hall. I'm sure he was also looking forward to this brief respite before joining me on my perimeter walk. After getting our servings of the best rehydrated eggs Uncle Sam has to offer, Jake hoofed it over to a corner of the tent, making it clear he was ready for a break from me. Still stung a little, but who truly enjoys someone's company for days on end? I scanned the room for a spot and quickly located Floyd, nose pressed into a notebook and ignoring his food. I took a seat across from him and coughed to get his attention. Nothing. He kept that book practically pressed against his face. I took note of how dirty his hands were. Mud was embedded under every fingernail. Not strange for a botanist, I suppose, but even his lab coat and khaki shorts, which he always kept pristine, were filthy, like he'd started rolling around in the mud to get closer to his research. "Earth to Floyd. How you doing, pal?" I said as I gave his notebook a couple of taps with my finger. Finally, Floyd lowered the book a bit and a pair of sunken, tired eyes peered back at me through a pair of glasses. "Oh, hey, Logan. They got you on night still," Floyd responded while placing his notebook face down on the table. Yeah, Captain Harrison is really sticking it to me," I replied while absent-mindedly poking the eggs with my fork. I was more interested in Floyd's appearance at this point, He looked like he'd dropped 50 pounds since I'd last seen him a couple of days prior. His normally round, chubby face was now gaunt with protruding cheekbones and dark bags under his eyes. "It's nothing I'm not used to," I added before hesitating a moment. "But, you doing okay, man? Where have they had you for the last couple of days?" "Been spending a lot of time in the big tent recently," Floyd said with some life returning to his eyes. "You wouldn't believe what we've been finding there. Just the other day we excavated this one spot and found..." "Floyd," a voice boomed from the entrance of the tent behind me. I turned to find an older researcher standing there with a deep scowl pointed directly at Floyd. I hadn't seen this guy before, but he appeared to be in his 50s, sporting an impressive comb-over and an unkempt beard. He too possessed the same sunken eyes, gaunt face, and dirty clothes that Floyd had. "Sorry, Logan, I gotta head back," Floyd whispered to me as he quickly rose out of his seat. He had made it halfway out of the tent when I noticed he left behind his notebook. I picked it up and shouted his name to get his attention. I only saw its contents for a moment before Floyd made it back to the table in practically a full sprint. He ripped the journal from my hand without a word and left the tent, following closely behind the other researcher. As I watched the pair make their way to the big tent, one thought bounced around in my mind. Whatever was written in that journal didn't look like any language I've ever seen, let alone English. Before I could spend time pondering what I had just seen, Jake approached me, tapping the watch on his wrist. Time to get back to work. We made the 20-minute walk to the edge of the jungle in silence. I don't think either of us had the energy to make small talk when hit with the realization that we were only halfway done with our shift. Upon breaching that final tangle of leaves, we were hit with the unmitigated heat of the desert. As creepy as this place was, at least it kept the heat at bay and stayed a constant 80 degrees or so. Now, it felt like we were constantly getting battered, head to toe, from the heat of an open oven. After taking a moment to acclimate, Jake and I did the only thing left to do, and we started walking. After a couple of laps of the perimeter and the desert finding its way inside my boots, I threw in the towel. "Look, man, even Harrison has to sleep at some point. We can take a few minutes. No one is going to notice," I said to Jake as I sank against a tree at the edge of the jungle to empty my shoes of the sand I'd collected. "You're unbelievable, dude. You get caught again and Harrison will probably have you scrubbing the latrines 24/7, not to mention what he'll do to me." The exasperation creeping into Jake's voice. Jake's warnings had no weight to them. I was already settling against the tree and lowering my hat over my eyes. "Yeah? Well, at least it won't be so damn hot scrubbing latrines." Jake tapped his watch. "You got 15 minutes and then we're moving again." "Yep, roger that," I mumbled back. Sleep was already taking me. Harrison couldn't get to me in my sleep, or he at least hadn't figured out a way to yet. Distant, muffled bangs, like your parents banging on your bedroom door because you're about to miss the bus, pulled me back to consciousness. The stiffness in my neck was the first clue I had been asleep much longer than the 15 minutes I had been allotted. The second clue became apparent as I rubbed my neck and scanned my surroundings. The sun was gone, and the night air of the desert was chilling me to my bones, and Jake was nowhere to be seen. "Jake, where you at, man?" I turned in a circle looking for any trace of him. Not even any shoe prints in the sand. Not even any shoe prints in the sand. Jake's idea of a prank? No, this wasn't like him. He's too straight-laced. I stood there weighing my options, disappearing into the desert never to be seen again, or face Harrison's wrath. I was leaning towards the former. Before I could decide, I heard those muffled bangs again. They were clearer now and unmistakable. Gunshots, coming from the direction of the base. The choice was made for me, so I grabbed my rifle and started jogging through the brush. My progress was hampered by the mud and the roots that crisscrossed over each other. I'd be no help to anyone with a busted ankle. I had made it about a mile deep when more bangs, followed by what sounded like screams muffled by the endless leaves, reached me. Time to pick up the pace. As I rounded a tree, running as fast as I dared, I felt something grab my collar. Combined with my momentum, my upper body violently bent back and my feet came flying into my field of view. After what felt like an eternity of being horizontal in the air, gravity reintroduced itself and I crashed into the mud. The air was ripped out of my lungs and I spent the next few moments teaching myself how to breathe again. I shakily rose to my feet and turned to face what had stopped me in my tracks. Sticking out of the tree at about neck height was what seemed to be, from a distance, a particularly gnarled and twisted branch. I stepped closer for an inspection. This branch had the uncanny likeness of an arm from the elbow down. 4 bark-covered fingers and a thumb met at a palm and curled like they were holding a baseball, which then flowed to a wrist. Just after the wrist, inexplicably, was a watch wrapped around the branch. It took a moment for the connections to form in my mind, but this was undoubtedly Jake's watch. I stared dumbstruck at the branch. Was this a prank? Some insane coincidence? I reached out to touch the branch, but an inch before touching it, the bark cracked and the fingers slammed closed into a fist. Another series of cracks sounded up and down the tree, while its whole body seemed to shudder for a fraction of a second. The arm was then yanked inside the trunk with frightening speed. I stared in stunned silence at where the branch once was, but now it was as if nothing was ever there. I took several steps back, my rifle pointing at the tree, waiting to see what else it was capable of, or if it wanted to bring me into its trunk next. However, it moved no more, resuming its facade of being just a tree. At this point, I was closer to being at the base than being out of this place. The calculation I ran in my head brought me to one conclusion: safety in numbers. I rechecked my rifle and ammo, then continued heading towards the base. Another half mile or so, and I finally reached the clearing that the base sat in. I slowly, methodically, swept the sight of my rifle across the camp as I approached, checking the shadows that the floodlights left behind, but I saw nothing. This once bustling camp was empty and entirely silent. I continued my slow approach, now heading to the communications tent. If, somehow, I was now the only person left here, I had to get the word out for help. I was within 50 feet of the tent when my boot landed on something hard and half submerged in the mud. A rifle with dozens of spent casings pressed into the ground around it. Looking around me, I saw more of these abandoned rifles, maybe 30 of them. There were also countless spent casings. Finding this raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Time to get what I needed and leave this damn jungle. I burst into the communications tent with my rifle raised, only to find it in the same condition as outside. Deserted. I grabbed a backpack, a laptop, a satellite uplink, and a radio. I slung the backpack with the equipment loaded into it onto my shoulder. I thought about using the communication equipment already in the tent to call for help, but I didn't want to spend a single moment in this place waiting for the reply. I had barely stepped outside the tent when 3 gunshots ran out to my left. I raised my rifle and aimed it towards the source. It was Captain Harrison, about 30 feet away. He was limping toward the big tent at the center of the camp. In his right hand, he held a pistol, with which he let off another shot. His left arm, covered in blood, hung limply at his side. "Captain!" I shouted. Harrison turned toward me, revealing his bloody face and the hole where his left eye had once been. "Murphy, get your ass over here and shoot this bastard." I looked toward where Harrison gestured and saw Floyd on the other side of the big tent's perimeter fence, approaching its entrance. "Floyd, "What's going on, man?" I yelled, my rifle trained on the back of his head. Floyd, or what was once Floyd, halted his walk and turned to look at me. I can only assume he looked at me. It's hard to say if he could look at anything due to the blood-soaked vines that seeped from his eyes and travelled down to wrap around his neck like a noose. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but more vines fell out and seemed to writhe like snakes. It's hard to say for sure due to the distance between us, but I could have sworn he did speak. The apple. He turned away and continued his walk to the tent. Captain Harrison swore and let loose a couple more shots. One managed to land in Floyd's back, but he didn't even flinch from the impact. Floyd disappeared into the tent's entrance and Captain Harrison limped as fast as he could after him. "Get in here now. That's an order, Murphy," Harrison shouted before he too disappeared into the tent. I'm ashamed to say it, but the thought of just leaving did cross my mind. Harrison is a bastard, but I don't think I could live with myself if I left him alone in this place. I exhaled deeply, gathered my focus, and made my way to the tent. When I reached the doorway, I examined the shadows, thick as ink, that waited for me in there. I heard nothing, no more gunshots or shouting from Harrison. I pressed my rifle to my shoulder once again and dove into that darkness. I was greeted with a jungle even denser than the one outside, and after a few moments of stumbling through the leaves and roots, a faint light started cutting through the darkness, a light coming from the center of the tent, a light of indescribable color that pulsed and seemed composed of every shade of color you could imagine, while also not having any color at all. As I approached, my surroundings were revealed by this light. All the plant life that surrounded me pulsed in time with the light, starting from where they connected to the ground and then rolling up to their tips like solitary waves travelling across a pond. After a moment, I was forced to look down, away from the light. My head had started to pound in time with the light. Thoughts that I couldn't trace the origin of started bubbling to the surface of my mind. The rifle is heavy. Put it down. Eat of the fruit. I shook my head, trying to clear the thoughts to no avail, then resorted to punching it. The pain cleared these thoughts, and I regained some clarity. I blocked the light with my hand and resumed my march. A few more yards and I broke through the brush. I had found my way to a clearing and the light was at its center, now radiating with an almost blinding intensity. I averted my eyes downward and saw that the ground of the clearing was entirely composed of vines. They all radiated from the center of the clearing and pulsed in time with the light. I did my best to block the light with my palm and examined my surroundings. I soon saw two silhouettes standing next to each other at the center of the clearing. One was holding what seemed to be a pistol against the other's head. The one with the pistol was shouting, but I couldn't make out the words. Here at the center, the light made my ears ring, almost entirely deafening me. The pulses grew more rapid until they abruptly stopped. Darkness shrouded everything for what felt like eons, but was broken by the light returning with the fury. It illuminated the entirety of the tent before seeming to violently sink into the ground. The two silhouettes fell down the sinkhole that appeared to have opened under the light. Underneath me, the vines ripped away and raced towards the pit as well, knocking me off my feet. The light was still shining, but it was dimmer now and only faintly visible creeping out of the pit. I slowly advanced towards the center, never letting the sight of my rifle leave the pit. I was within 20 feet of the pit when a scream broke out from its maw. The scream, which conveyed unimaginable pain, stopped me in my tracks. I broke out into a cold sweat and my eyes grew dry from staring unblinkingly at the pit. A pair of hands appeared at the edge of the pit and dug their nails into the dirt. Then Another pair directly next to the first appeared. The two sets of hands tightened their grips on the edge of the pit, and the rest of this monstrosity came into view as it pulled itself up. It was Floyd, and also Harrison. They stood side by side, but not by choice. Vines pierced their skin, stitching them to each other from their hips up to their shoulders. Their respective arms and heads slumped lifelessly to either side. The source of the light was nestled into the tangle of vines that connected the two. It was dimmer now, and I could make out its shape. It looked something like an apple. I took a painfully slow step backwards, and my boot contacted the now bare ground with a squish. That thing stiffened, and both heads locked onto me. Harrison now had the same vines protruding from his eyes and mouth as Floyd. Their shared body seemed to have countless tendrils writhing under the skin, threatening to burst forth at any moment. Another tense moment. My finger slowly started to squeeze the trigger, and then that thing spoke. "Rejoice, child." Harrison and Floyd's heads took turns as it spoke. "We are at the precipice. Eden's rebirth is at hand." I didn't find myself in the mood for a chat, so I responded with a bullet to Harrison's head and a couple to Floyd's chest. The new holes I gave it didn't release a single drop of blood, nor did the bullets faze it at all. It simply stared at me with those 4 holes that were once eyes. Then it seemed to falter for a moment and started to fall forward. Maybe the bullets did do something after all, or so I hoped. Before it could fall on its face, its arms and legs shot out and caught it mere inches from the ground. Then it ran at me. Run isn't the right word. Scurried is more accurate, as it stumbled over its multitude of limbs. It was ungraceful, but fast. So fast. I turned on my heel and ran, ditching the rifle almost immediately. It was made clear it would do me no good. With adrenaline pumping, I tore through the foliage. I somehow made it through the exit and out into the base. I'm sure the only reason I made it out is due to that thing not being used to its body. However, it was getting used to that body quickly. As I ran into the corridors that the rows of tents made, it barreled out into the open as well, no longer stumbling over itself. It quickly caught sight of me and resumed the chase. It was gaining on me with terrifying speed as I was approaching a sharp turn in that corridor. When it was within 5 feet of me, it pounced, all its arms extended and ready to grab me. In a feat of athleticism I never imagined myself capable of, I dropped my weight downward and went into a slide. The abomination flew over me and into the tent ahead of us. It thrashed and screamed a haunting, feral noise as it tangled itself in the fabric of the tent. I wasn't about to let this opportunity slip through my fingers, so I took off towards the edge of the camp. I swung by one of the fire pits and grabbed a canteen that had been left behind, then entered the jungle. I had only made it about 100 yards into it when I heard screams and the breaking of branches as that thing pursued me. I paid no mind and kept running till my lungs burned, running till my legs felt like they'd snap underneath me, running till I tasted blood in my mouth. I didn't dare look back, but I knew that thing was moments from being on top of me. With a final, desperate push, I broke through the tree line and landed face first into the sand. Laying there, I heard one final scream, a scream brimming with an unmistakable rage and frustration. I turned back to the jungle and saw the abomination staring at me. The tendrils under its skin twisted and contorted with tremendous speed. It was only a couple of steps away, but it didn't stray from the tree line. Then it opened its mouth. It matters not. His kingdom will reclaim all, and all his children will be reunited. Our staring match continued for a few more moments before it slowly moved backward and ultimately disappeared into the leaves and vines. My head fell back onto the sand, and I spent a few minutes catching my breath and waiting for my heart to stop pounding. Once I felt up to it, I got back on my feet and started walking into the desert. I walked the rest of the night and through the entirety of the next day. Exhaustion eventually consumed me, and I had to stop for the night and pass out. That's where I am now, shivering in the morning cold of the desert. I managed to send a message to the brass telling them what happened. I got one brief reply, then a communication blackout. Stay where you are. I'm not so dumb that I don't know what they intend to do. Scorched earth policy. They can't let knowledge of this get out, and I'm a huge loose end. So, I'm gonna give them the finger one last time. That's why I'm writing this here, to make sure this doesn't get buried. Still, I know I'm not leaving this desert. I don't have enough water, and this laptop's battery is almost dead. It won't be dehydration that takes me though. When I woke up, the jungle was within eyesight again. It had grown miles while I slept. I won't be able to outpace it for long. I suspect it's fruitless to try, and that soon there won't be anywhere free from this jungle. Best of luck to you all. I just want to thank Reddit user Brave Audience 5469 for allowing me to narrate this story. If you liked what you heard here, head over to their Reddit page and show them some love. I'll leave a link for the original story in the description below. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare. My friend and I went hiking, and I'm starting to think she never left those woods. My friend Samantha and I were so excited to take a road trip together to go hiking somewhere further from home. We'd been talking about it since we graduated college a few years back and finally found the time. Well, she always made the time. It was mainly me that had trouble balancing work with anything else. Looking back now, I wish I had spent more of this trip focusing on Sam, the scenery, and being present in the moment. I wish I had been a better friend. Sam was the most excited for our trip the week before we left. She was texting me about the restaurants in the area, stuff to do. She made a Spotify playlist with both of our favourites so we could listen to 7 hours of an eclectic mix of classic rock, pop and black metal, and was marking trailheads we might enjoy on her Google Maps app. I felt bad for putting the trip off for so long. We got to catch up, explore, try cool food. We had a great trip until our final hike. We're both in decent shape, and since we had the supplies and plenty of daylight, we decided we were going to try a longer, unpaved trail that went around this beautiful lake. It was the last hike of our trip, and we decided to take a more difficult and less crowded trail. Initially, it was a wonderful hike. The water was such a surreal shade of blue, and the pine trees and rolling hills were breathtaking. The air was thinner than we were used to, but so refreshing. As we hiked around one bend, I almost ran right into Sam's back. I had been falling behind, focusing on placing my feet in exactly the right locations in the soft dirt so I didn't go sliding down 20 feet to the shore. Sam stood frozen, a deer in front of her blocking the trail. As I approached with my backpack jingling and breathing heavily, the deer stood for a moment more, tilting its head sideways at me before darting back into the pines. She looked back at me, her face tight. "Did you see that?" "The deer? Yeah, it was pretty magical." She gave a little laugh as she started up again so we could both move on to the section of the trail that had sturdier footing. "No, I mean, something was wrong with that deer. It was way too comfortable around me, and I don't know if you could see or hear it, but it was drooling and making these weird sounds." We continued on in silence after that as we focused on our footing and the scenery, stopping every so often to take pictures. One time, when we were stopped, we heard rustling to our right, higher up on the hill. I got the bear spray out and held on to it. It seemed to be walking parallel to us, roughly matching our pace. It sounded big too. Eventually, the hiking trail rose to meet the higher part of the hill, and I couldn't help but sigh in relief. I'd been so worried I'd roll my ankle and tumble down the mountain, so it was good to have more room so I wasn't walking right on the edge. Back in college, I'd sprained my ankle badly, but couldn't afford to see a doctor. It healed a bit oddly, and since then, my left ankle has been iffy. After a while, I needed to sit for a moment, walking uphill for an hour. In addition to the 6,500 foot elevation, I was struggling. Maybe I'm also a bit more out of shape than I had been willing to admit, too. Sam sat with me for a moment, but then saw some wildflowers about 10 feet into the woods and left to go take a quick picture. With her gone, I felt a sudden chill. Something was watching me. "Sam," I called out nervously as the rustling grew louder and I gripped my container of bear spray tightly. It stepped out of the woods, and it was just a deer. Or, more specifically, it was the deer, the same one that Sam and I had encountered. Now that she had pointed it out, I could see what she was saying. The deer had no issues approaching me. It was scrawny, walked slowly, but like it had a bit too much to drink, and it was definitely drooling. I jumped up and waved my arms at it. "Go away!" I knew it was sick, and the poor thing was confused and probably suffering, but it creeped me the hell out. It cocked its head and seemed to be studying me, looking me up and down. It approached me and made some sort of gasping sound. It was opening and closing its mouth in a way which deeply unsettled me for some reason. "Sam!" She came running towards me from the woods, and when I turned back, it had gone. "Are you okay? What happened?" "The creepy deer was back. I know it sounds silly, but I think it's been following us." I told her how it had been behaving. "Do you think it's rabbit?" "Poor baby," she said sympathetically. "Possibly. Or I wonder if it has CWD. Either way, we should probably let the park rangers know, just in case." We had decided we'd stick together, but after a few miles, she ended up ahead of me again. She tends to inch forward to get pictures, whereas I tend to walk past sites, then have regrets and double back to take pictures. I had walked back a bit and was sitting down angling my phone weirdly to try and fit the scene in front of me in the frame when I heard Sam's voice, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. "Hey, I'll be right there," I said, my voice raised slightly, assuming she was talking to me. Then she screamed. "Sam!" I stood up and tried to walk as quickly and carefully as possible. Her screaming changed from fear to agony, and it sounded like she was sobbing. I wasn't sure what had happened, but I could tell she was scared and likely hurt. I suddenly realized I was still holding our only canister of bear spray. Against my better judgment, I started running as fast as I could, and for a while I was making good time. But then my foot landed in a patch of soft dirt at the edge of the trail. My ankle rolled, and I was falling. I don't remember hitting the ground, but I remember opening my eyes flat on my back, about 15 feet below where I had been standing. It was also dark outside. We'd started hiking at least 6 or 7 hours before sunset. I tried to stand, but it was a struggle. I was confused, disorientated. Trying to get up was taking all of my energy and focus. I had a deep feeling of dread I couldn't explain. As I started slowly moving upwards on my hands and knees, I tried to recall what had happened leading up to my fall. Sam sounded hurt. She was screaming. I had run after her and then I fell. Shit, Sam. I called her name, my voice hoarse, but no response. My phone was surprisingly only minorly damaged, but I had no reception. Luckily, since it had been buckled to me, I still had our backpack. I dug through it. We had first aid kits, but I figured I could patch myself up later. I didn't want to stay down here any longer than I had to. I found my knife and my headlamp. After about 20 minutes, I had slowly and painfully ascended back towards where I had fallen from. My hands were raw and I could feel my right knee bleeding through my pants. I was trying to go slowly since I trusted my feet even less now, and dizziness was starting to creep in, but panic and fear drove me forward. Once I made it back to the trail, I had to sit for a moment. I heard rustling behind me and felt a sudden pang of fear. Something or someone had injured Sam, and here I was sitting alone, injured, with my back to the woods, in the dark. I tried calling her name in case it was her that I heard. No response. I stood up and started limping as quickly as possible towards the direction that I had last heard her scream. Luckily, the ground had evened out because I could feel myself weaving unsteadily. I knew that something terrible may have happened to her, but I kept trying to keep that thought out of my mind. As my calls to her remained unanswered and it became harder to imagine a scenario in which she was okay, I felt my throat tighten and tears roll down my cheeks. I kept looking for her. I knew she wouldn't just leave me here. I think part of me knew then that she was gone. She would have been searching for me if she was okay, and even if she left to get help, I think they would have found me by now. Somehow, eventually, I navigated my way down to where I thought she had last been. I was hoping maybe if she was just injured, she would be okay and just out of it and confused like I was. My foot caught in the mud and I fell. Lights flashed behind my eyelids and I felt overcome with nausea. The light from my headlamp had greatly dimmed as it was now coated in mud and grime. I heard movement behind me. As the smell hit me, I realized the mud was dirt mixed with blood. I could taste it, mixed with the gritty texture. Leaves covered with what was likely blood stuck to my face, and I felt something soft and wet under my shoulder. The rustling behind me became discernible as footsteps. I felt around for my knife, my bear spray, but instead felt something hard, sticky. I was certain I had just found out what happened to Sam, and had a good guess at what was about to happen next to me. I felt no urge to get up as the footsteps got closer. I knew I couldn't outrun it. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on something, anything else, not knowing if I wanted to see what was coming for me. The footsteps stopped, and I could hear laboured breathing coming from above me. I waited. And then, as no blows came, I opened my eyes. It was Sam. She stood over me, breathing heavily from her mouth. She was covered in blood. Her shirt and pants were torn, but she was alive. I let out a relieved sob and then could no longer hold back the tears. "Oh my God," I whispered as I slowly moved to sitting and then standing. "I thought I had lost you." I pulled her close to me into a hug. She stood motionless, her arms at her side. She stuck to me where her shirt was still a bit wet. Dried blood covered the neck of her shirt and her midsection. Her hands, and unsettlingly her mouth, were also smeared with blood. I could still hear her breathing heavily close to my ear. "What happened?" I asked as I released her. She stared at me, but didn't respond. I figured she was a bit traumatized. Frankly, I wasn't sure how she was up and standing at all after whatever had happened. She was a bit wobbly, but otherwise seemed to be able to walk. As we walked towards the car, she fell behind, which made me nervous as I didn't want to let her out of my sight. She kept stopping, staring over her shoulder, while I tried to coax her forward. Eventually, after what felt like forever, we made it back. My ankle was killing me, but I had tried to move as fast as possible. Although the woods were eerily silent, I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. When we got to her car, I was debating if we should drive ourselves to the hospital or call 911. I had this feeling of terror that I couldn't shake. I pictured us making it all the way here to the car and then something breaking the windows, attacking us. I decided we needed to leave now. "Do you have your keys? Do you think you can drive?" I asked. She had an old Jeep pickup and was very sensitive about other people driving a baby. Plus, I wasn't sure I could drive us with my ankle as it was. She said nothing, cocked her head at me. "I know, we look like we've been mauled by a bear." I caught myself and winced, feeling suddenly insensitive. She clearly had been attacked by something, or someone. When she said nothing, displayed no emotion or reaction, I cautiously continued. "But I have a bad feeling. I think we need to leave, like right now. I'd rather call for help when we're back on the main road, or just drive straight to the hospital." She remained motionless, staring back into the woods, and I wondered if she'd lost her keys and whatever struggle she had. Luckily, I had her spare with me. I unlocked the doors and she continued to stand outside. I realized I would need to punish my ankle a bit more because she was far too out of it to drive. I slid in, but she remained motionless. "Sam, get in, please. Something is out here still. Please." She was licking her lips, staring back at me again. In the darkness, her blue eyes looked almost black. I limped back out of the seat and opened her door for her, and had to guide her in. I buckled her in after she made no move to do so herself. As we drove and headlights of passing cars illuminated the interior, I kept checking on her out of the corner of my eye. She was breathing in and out of her mouth and staring at me. I noticed now, in the better light, that she was drooling. "Hey, how are you doing?" No response, but she began opening and closing her mouth and making a wet, gasping sound as she breathed in and out. Her breath reeked and her teeth were tinged pink. I don't have much medical knowledge, but I was worried she had punctured a lung due to the strange sounds she was making. "Hold tight, we're about 20 minutes from the hospital." Despite my ankle, I drove as fast as I could. We made it in 10. As we pulled up, I helped guide her out of the car and walked behind her, steadying her. I noticed something. Her shirt was on inside out. It hadn't been this morning. Likely because of how we looked, they found rooms for us immediately in the ER. I had a bad sprain and a concussion and would need a few stitches, but it felt so good just to be out of those woods. I asked the nurse that came to check on me about how Sam was doing. I mentioned to him that I'm not sure if she was attacked by an animal or a person. I mentioned what I had noticed about her shirt, and that we may have encountered a sick animal, in case any of that helped. When he returned, he was clearly distressed. Sam was gone. She hadn't appeared to be outwardly injured, strangely, but they had wanted to assess for internal trauma. However, the first moment they had left her alone, she had just walked out, judging by the bloody footprints. It's been weeks and I haven't seen Sam since. Her mum hasn't either. She has been working with the police out here. They think Sam has a head wound and is just confused and will turn up in town eventually. But a few days ago, I heard on the news that a partial skeleton was found on the trail we were on. Likely the victim of an animal attack, they said, and due to the condition of the body, they were asking for leads so they could use dental records to help identify the victim. This might sound crazy, but I think it's her they found. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't think Sam ever left those woods that night. It's my fault, and I don't know what that thing was that I drove into town. If you live in southern Colorado, please be safe. I'm sorry. I just want to thank JamFranz for allowing me to narrate this story. If you liked what you heard here, head over to their Reddit page and show them some love. I'll leave a link for the original story in the description below. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare. Primal Desire by Butts the Slack Goudsman. I won't eat you, I promise. The words on the computer screen reflected in Jesse's eyes. His stomach lifted as if in an elevator. His chest constricted to the point where he wasn't sure if he could breathe the next breath. He never thought he could be so lucky as to find the one. With shaky fingers, he typed on the keyboard, daring not to raise his hopes any higher. You said you were with a guy before. What about him? He almost forgot to breathe as he waited for Lily's response. It was funny. They had been chatting online for months to the point where they practically knew everything about each other, yet this one thing was what he anticipated most of all to know. The icon changed from a scene icon and then to a typing icon. Jesse's heart jumped in his throat. I let him go without hurting him. I can control it. I'm not like the other girls. See you tonight? Jesse was so elated he felt like he was floating. His arms felt detached from his body as he typed back. Yes, baby. Just gotta wait for my mum to go to sleep. Jesse pushed away from his desk in ecstasy. What were the odds? He remembered in sexual defense class that the odds of finding a woman who wouldn't eat you were less than 1 in a million. Yet here she was, only a couple of blocks from his house. His jubilation was interrupted by a sharp voice behind him. What are you doing? Jesse's heart plummeted from his throat all the way to his stomach as he hurriedly tried to close the chat window on his computer screen, but it was no use. His mum made the distance from his door to the computer desk in a single, powerful bound and clutched his hand painfully. There was no escaping her iron grip. He could only look down as she read his chat logs. Jesse tensed his body as she read, prepared for the explosion of anger. Instead, he was shocked to see tears glossing over her brown eyes. Her lined face seemed to age 10 years as she looked from the screen back to Jesse. No, Jesse, not yet. I can't lose you yet, she whispered in a voice thick with sorrow. But Mum, she says she's not like the other girls. It will be safe, I promise. Now came the explosion. That's what they all say, his mum roared. The tenderness in her face was reforged into the angry expression he was used to. She slammed the laptop screen down. As she let go of the laptop, Jessie saw the top was indented where her fingers once were. That's it. I've put this day off long enough. Your time has come. Tomorrow morning, I'm turning you into the sanctuary, she growled. The sanctuary? Whatever was left of Jesse's heart melted inside him. The fear of the accursed breed tank put a backbone into Jesse. I don't want to go to the sanctuary, he shouted back at her. He'd read the forum posts from those inside. Sure, the woman portrayed it as a place for men to live safely, but it was really just a breeding farm. Why should I go? To be bred like cattle? So you can live, she yelled back. Her eyes almost gave her a demented look about her. You know that as a young man, you have a responsibility for mankind. The indignity of the situation caused his chest to seethe with anger, so much so he pushed his luck. Is that what you told Dad before you fucking ate him? Smack. Her strike rocketed him off his roller chair and onto the ground. The metallic taste of blood filled Jesse's mouth as something hard rattled in his mouth. Fishing it out with his tongue, he spat out a tooth. His mother's once hard face broke into concern. She bent down to Jesse and helped him up. Her grip was soft and tender this time around, and the tears fell thickly on her face once again. Jesse knew her violence was due to the flux in her adrenal glands, but he recoiled at her touch all the same. She held him, her body racked with sobs. My boy, I can't lose my boy, she whimpered. Jesse, sensing his mum was fully back, put his arms around her. Don't worry, Mum. I'll go to the sanctuary, he murmured. She broke away from him and gave him a tearful nod. She kissed his forehead, bade him a good night, and closed the door to his bedroom. Once the door was closed, Jesse opened the same chat window on his phone. I'm on my way now. He hesitated. Fuck it. Now or never. I love you. The light from the full moon glimmered in his window as he quietly slid it open. Taking care not to make a noise, he tiptoed his way out of the window and onto the lawn. The neighbourhood was typically suburban, with nice lawns and lit sidewalks. Though Lily was only a couple of blocks away, Jesse felt his hairs stand up on end. Men weren't allowed outside by themselves. He'd have to stay out of the light from the street lamps. The things he did for love. He set off down the street, down to the corner of the first block, taking care to stay close to the sidewalk, but out of the light. The windows in each house he passed felt like eyes watching him. He knew he stuck out like a sore thumb. At any time a woman could look out her window and report him. His brief escapade into stealth was shattered by the moment he tried to cross the street. Flashing blue and red lights illuminated Jesse like a kaleidoscope as a patrol van burst from the shadows. Jesse froze where he stood with his hands up. There was no running from the patrol van, nor the woman driving it. A shadow stepped out of the patrol van, contrasting with the siren lights. The lights shut off, but the imprint of them were burned into his eyes. As he squinted, he made out the figure of a tall brunette woman. She was youthful and grinning broadly, with a mouth slightly too large for comfort, as if she were itching to take a bite out of him. Well, well, well. Where were we off to tonight, Romeo? Her sing-song voice was tuned in a teasing manner. Jesse knew that there was no use lying. There was only one reason men were caught by themselves. She said she's not like the others. She can control it, he stammered, cringing at how stupid the words sounded coming out. The officer let out a snort of laughter. Jesus fucking Christ, that's what they all say. Shit, that's what I said to the last guy, and you dumb fucks eat it up every single time. You idiots almost deserve what you get. Jesse's cheeks burned with shame and indignation. She was wrong. Lily was different. The officer seemed to sense what he was thinking. She motioned for him to follow her. Come here, kid. Let me show you what happened to the last guy who fell in love. He followed her to the back of the van and opened it up with a creak. Lying in the bed was a black body bag. Rather than a single lump indicating a body, it had lumps perforated all over it. Cover your nose, kid, she warned as she unzipped the bag. Acidic bile burned Jesse's throat as he vomited in disgust. There wasn't a body in the bag. In fact, there was nothing recognizable. Inside was a pinkish paste with bits of bone jutting out at random locations. A single eyeball floated in the mess and stared at him. I'm telling you now, kid, once she locks eyes on you, there's no turning back. Once those pheromones mix with the adrenal glands, she inhaled deeply through her nose and tipped her head back. She let out a long, shuddering exhale. God, there's no fucking rush like it. She looked down at him. Her once human face was contorted into something else entirely. Her mouth, already big enough, stretched even larger, revealing rows of sharpening teeth. Her pupils dilated to the point in which her irises were nearly engulfed. Her breathing grew rapid, with a wild edge in each lengthening exhale as thick veins wriggled their way across her forearms. Jesse's phone went off in his pocket, seeming to snap the officer out of it. Her features went back to normal as she let out a small laugh. No. It's better for nice young boys to go to the sanctuary. Jesse gave her a shaky nod. He'd never seen what was left from a mating up close before. The eye staring at him was burned into his psyche. What the hell was he thinking? He needed to just go back home. The officer offered him a ride home, to which he accepted, not sure if she'd even allow him to refuse. She asked for his address as she got behind the wheel. Being around her made him nervous, and he'd already lost his bearings, having never been outside before. He had to look up the address in his phone. As he pulled it out, he saw Lily was the one who messaged him. "I love you too." Jesse's heart felt like it would burn its way through his chest. Everything that just happened, all his resolve, melted away like the morning frost gives way to sunlight. Lily was the only thing that mattered. He immediately scrolled up in the chat window and gave the officer Lily's address instead of his own. The officer cruised down the street with Jesse, trying to contain his shaking. His crazy plan was going to work. She had to be different. He'd gone through so much. She had to be the one. Lily really did only live a couple of blocks away. The patrol van came to a soft halt as Jesse looked out the window to his soulmate's house. It was a modest one-story house with a neat, well-kept lawn. The windows were dark, but he could see a shaft of light through the drawn curtains. Lily. "Well, get out," the officer snapped at him as her radio went off. "Breaker, 1090, we've got another runner from the sanctuary." Jesse's mouth went bone dry as he opened the door and stepped out. The siren lights of the van flickered back on and it sped off into the night, leaving Jesse barely illuminated by the edge of a streetlight. He breathed heavily as he faced the house. He'd never thought he'd get this far. The surrealness of the situation made him lightheaded. Did he just knock? He tried to will his legs to move, but they were leaden. Heart pounding in his chest, he brought out his phone. "I'm here." His heart nearly stopped as there was an immediate scene icon. The curtains drew back and he saw a small figure looking at him. He mustered up all his strength and made his legs move to the door. There was a clack and the door creaked open, revealing Lily. He'd never seen a woman his age before. She was about 6 inches shorter than him, with long, dirty blonde hair that nearly touched her waist. Everything about her screamed delicate. Her large eyes, small, pointed nose, heart-shaped face fit her small frame perfectly. There was no way someone so small could hurt him. For the first time, he felt no fear looking at a woman. Her mouth split into a smile, not the crazed smile he saw in the officer, but a sweet smile with genuine happiness. "Hi, I'm Lily," she said in a high-pitched voice. Jesse stood there smiling like an idiot. I'm Jesse," he stammered. He reached out to shake her hand, but something stopped him right before they touched. That eye. That damn eye imprinted in his mind flashed until it was all he could see. Like a dam, all the memories of the previous hour flooded his mind. He took a step back, eyeing her warily. Lily was taken aback, as if she sensed his thoughts. She sniffed as tears formed in her eyes. I'm not a monster," she said in a small voice looking down. To his horror, her thin shoulders started to shake as she cried. All his apprehension melted away as he reached out to grab her hand. The moment he touched her hand, it was over. They both stared deeply into each other's eyes as the pheromones took over both of them. This time, Lily sprang back, blood draining from her face. "You have to stay away from me, Jesse. You're not like the other guy. I can't control myself around you." She couldn't finish her sentence as her eyes glazed over. Jesse's mind was hazy with a fog so thick he couldn't parse a thought. All that mattered was Lily. He walked towards her as she walked towards him, both under each other's spell. It didn't matter that she broke his wrist as she gripped it. All that mattered was Lily. It didn't matter that she effortlessly threw him into her house, dislocating her shoulder. Only Lily. The blood dribbling from his mouth didn't matter as he got back up, ignoring the pain. Lily. She closed the door behind her and was immediately upon him. She held him so tightly against her, he felt as if they would fuse into one. So be it. As the mating began, all essence of Jessie was stripped away, replaced by a primal desire, an intense, lustful need that had to be quenched. Everything Jessie ever was, all his emotions, his hopes, his dreams, were condensed into a singular point that felt fit to burst. As Jessie felt it burst, an electric sensation pulsed throughout his body as he felt the most indescribable pleasure in his life. In that moment he knew the meaning of life. This sensation was the only truth. Jessie jolted back to reality. His entire arm up to his shoulder was aflame in agony. His entirely naked body was weak, so weak that he could barely muster up the strength to move even if his arm wasn't broken. A low, guttural roar above him caused him to look up. Lily was seated upon him. Her eyes were rolled upwards into her head, and her mouth was opening. It opened wider and wider, stretching past human proportions. There was a sickening pop as her jaw dislocated and continued to open. Jessie's weakened heart pounded as hard as it could. He knew what was happening, the transformation. His mind vaguely remembered that the only chance men had to survive a mating was to escape while the woman went through her first transformation. He struggled into an upright sitting position. Lily's veins all over were wriggling like worms under her skin, and her body started to spasm. Letting out panicked breaths, Jessie tried to roll out from under her, but he rolled onto his broken arm. Blades of fiery pain ran all along his arm as he screamed out. He put a hand to his mouth. The guttural noises stopped. Time almost seemed to stop as he drew his gaze to her. Her eyes were completely black and locked onto his. Her mouth hung open almost halfway down her neck, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth that were still lengthening. Her hands gripped his shoulders painfully, holding him down. With no escape, Jessie had only one fantastical hope. Maybe she was still in there somewhere. He reached out a hand and gently grazed her cheek, trying not to recoil at how hard and muscular it felt now. "Lily," he whispered. To his surprise, he felt her hand release his shoulder and gently stroke his cheek. Tears flowed from her abyssal eyes as she looked deep into his eyes. He knew it. She was different from the other girls. The cure to survival was true love. Lily grabbed Jessie's jaw in each hand and sank her teeth into Jessie's throat. The rows of teeth cut through his flesh like a hot knife through butter. Yanking her head back, she tore out the entirety of his throat. Jessie fell back to the ground in a shower of his own blood. The last thing he saw was Lily plunging both of her fists through his chest. The last thing he felt was her clawed hands digging through his chest to find his heart. With a squeeze of her fist, Jessie's heart was broken for the last time. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," Lily chanted over and over again at what was left of Jessie. If she squinted hard enough, his dislocated eyeball seemed to give her a forgiving look. The entirety of Jessie's torso was hollowed out and inside Lily now. Lily bitterly cursed herself. Not like the other girls. So stupid. She learned that before a woman took on their first transformation, they could delude themselves into thinking that they could never eat a man. But it was only that, a delusion. Once the first transformation took hold, they became beholden to their inescapable desires, and Lily was no different. Taking out her phone, she messaged the man she had let go. Realizing to herself she'd only let him go to save him for later, she texted, "I won't eat you. I promise." I just want to thank Butts the Slack Goudsman for allowing me to narrate this story. If you liked what you heard here, make sure you head over to their page and show them some love. I'll leave a link for that in the description below. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare. I Don't Shower with My Door Ajar Anymore by J.L. Goodwin, 1990. I used to shower with my bathroom door open just a crack. For whatever dumb reason, the tiny, cramped apartment bathroom I've had to deal with for the last 9 years or so loves to steam and fog up, even with the water on warm instead of hot. And since my crappy as hell landlord refused to fix the ceiling mounted fan, which would have ventilated the room, along with the fact it caused the ancient off-white paint to sweat and start developing mould patches in any other case, something which he would have charged me to clean, I made the decision to leave the door open a bit to allow the steam to escape. For almost a decade, nothing out of the ordinary happened, and I went about my daily life, the habit becoming a routine in my mind. That was up until 2 months or so ago. You see, I was alone that day. My roommate had gone out for the day to take part in some bowling tournament, and I had the run of the place for the next 4 to 6 hours. As it was my day off from work, I decided to start it off with a long, hot, relaxing shower. So I grabbed a fresh set of towels from the small closet next to my bedroom door, stepped inside, and, after turning on the water to let it warm up, I hopped in. I'd just lathered the shampoo up in my hair when I heard a noise come from just outside the bathroom. It was almost masked by the sound of the water splashing down on me and the floor of the tub, but it was out of place enough that I caught it. It was almost the sound you'd hear if you dragged long fingernails down the wall. I froze, the shampoo dripping down over my face, making it difficult to see anything at all. The sound came again. For a moment, the thought of someone breaking in flashed through my mind. After all, the neighbourhood I lived in has the nickname of Mythpire for a reason. But if someone had broken a window or forced the lock, I would have heard it. The place isn't exactly big enough to miss those sounds. Finally, I opens my mouth. "Tyler?" Instantly, the sound, which had begun to repeat itself for the 3rd time, ceased, the entire place going silent, save for the water. I felt a small wave of annoyance zap through me. "Tyler, this better not be another one of your games," I thought as I hurriedly washed the shampoo out of my hair. My roommate had a habit, being a horror junkie, in delighting and attempting to play pranks on me, knowing I had a tendency to be a little jumpy. Without shutting off the water, I reached out, grabbed a towel off the rack, and stepped out, wrapping it around my waist. "Tyler, I swear to God, if this is another attempt to scare me, I'm going to kick your ass," I called, striding across the tiled floor and yanking the door all the way open. I looked around. There was nobody in the living room or the kitchen, which opened off it. I glanced around. Then, just to ease my own mind, I walked first to my bedroom, then Tyler's. Looking in, both were empty, and there wasn't exactly any place for someone to quickly hide in either of them. I must have just been hearing things. Shrugging my shoulders, I turned and jumped back into the shower to finish up. That evening, when Tyler came back home from celebrating with his team, apparently having blitzed the competition, I decided to question him as we sat at the kitchen table, eating Chinese takeout. "Hey, Ty," I asked casually, glancing up from my chopsticks. "Yeah?" he mumbled out through a mouthful of his food, causing me to roll my eyes at his lack of manners. "You didn't happen to come home earlier today for a moment, did you?" He looked up at me, a slightly perplexed expression on his face. "Nah, man, I was at the alley until 3 and out drinking with the boys until 5. Why?" I searched his face. The guy had a tendency to chew a little too much when he was bullshitting to me. It was a towel I'd learnt to spot of his, thanks to endless nights of playing poker against one another. "No reason. Just thought I heard something while I was in the shower this morning." I looked at him, smirking slightly. "Thought you might have come back to grab something you needed and decided to try and pull one over on me again." He let out a huge burp in response, then reached forward and grabbed his bottle of Coke, tilting it back and taking a swig. "No, man," he said simply, using the back of his sleeve to wipe his lips. "Besides, if I'd come back and tried to scare you, You'd have known it. He let out a low laugh, one which, after a moment of studying him, I shared. He was clearly telling the truth. "Yeah, I guess you're right, bro," I said, dropping my chopsticks into the empty container and hocking it over my shoulder into the trash can. He leaned back and, using his own empty container, feigned being a basketball player and acted like he was making a free throw. The container bounced off the edge, making us both laugh. I pushed what had to be a trick of my mind out of my head, and the two of us spent the rest of the night playing video games and downing beers. The next week went by without any other strange noises, and I almost completely forgot about this strange incident. Ty had gone out for the evening on a date, and after binge watching all 3 Creature from the Black Lagoon movies, I flicked the television off and headed for the shower. Hopping in, I softly hummed some 50s tune stuck in my mind and lathered myself up with soap. I'd just put the shampoo in my hair when I'd heard the scraping sound again. This time, it was a bit louder, and I knew it hadn't been my imagination. I became still as a statue, my head under the water and blurred between it and the shampoo slowly being rinsed out of it of its own accord. I almost held my breath, listening. The sounds came again. This time, instead of the wall, the scrape clearly came from the wooden doorway to the bathroom. I felt my heart thudding harder in my chest. Then, my eyes widened as I saw a shadow filter through the opaque shower curtain. It was the shadow of the bathroom door, slowly opening. I found my voice. "Who's out there?" I called, attempting to sound as tough and authoritative as I could. Just like last time, the moment I spoke up, all movement and sound ceased, the apartment going silent. This time, however, the air almost felt charged, as if the tension in it were palpable enough to be cut by a knife. I reached out, wrapping my fingers around the edge of the curtain as I grabbed the closest thing I could find as a weapon, a full bottle of shampoo. It was a pathetic weapon, which likely wouldn't faze any intruder, but it was still better than nothing. Taking a deep breath, I wrenched the curtain back, the sound of the hooks scraping on the metal pole almost sounding like a scream in the quiet. Just like last time, there was no sign of a soul. The only thing that gave away that anything had changed was that the bathroom door was, indeed, standing wide open. The darkened outline of the living room beyond made me feel uneasy. I couldn't place why, but it almost felt as if the gloom held a threatening atmosphere. Shutting off the water, I stepped out and wrapped the towel around my waist. Stepping to the doorway, I reached out into the dark and felt around the edge of the door until my fingers found the light switch. Instantly, the dark was banished away by the bright white light overhead. I could see that nobody was in sight in the living room. This time, however, I wasn't taking any chances. Water still dripping off me, I strode across the living room to where I dropped my belt I wore when out on the job as a plumber. I reached down and pulled a rather large pipe wrench from its place, gripping it with wet and, admittedly, slightly shaky hands. The kitchen was clearly devoid of life, and I focused my vision on the 2 bedrooms, which lay dark. My door was wide open, but Ty's was slightly closed. I glanced at the hook on the wall, noting that his car keys weren't hanging from them next to mine. He's not home, which means... shit. I felt my muscles tense up. I seriously didn't want to deal with some homeless junkie who had somehow gotten himself inside and was trying to find something to steal, or worse, attack me in some drug-fueled rage. I forced myself to speak as loud and tough as I could. "I'm warning you, if anyone is in here, I am armed." I didn't add the fact that it was a wrench and not a gun. "If you come out and just leave, this will get a lot easier." Silence. The only sound I could hear was a car passing by outside. I called again. "Look, I'm in no mood for this, so come out and get the hell out of my place." Still nothing. but I felt an odd sensation, one of which caused the hairs on my arms to stand up straight, even damp. It was the feeling of being watched. My eyes caught the flicker of movement as shadow seemed to draw back away from my roommate's half-closed door. I knew right there and then that I should have called the cops, but some dumb sense of bravado had come over me, and I wanted to be like those tough guys in the older movies, taking care of things themselves. "This is your final warning," I called to the bedroom. After about 20 seconds of more silence, I drew a deep breath, raised the wrench as high over my head as I could, and, letting out a bellowing yell, dashed for the bedroom door as if I was simultaneously a football linebacker and an Olympic torch carrier. I burst into the room like a charging bull, the door smashing into the wall behind it with the sickening crunch of plaster breaking. I shot my free arm out and wrenched the light switch up. The room was empty. Ty's scattered clothes, records and game cases lay strewn about on the floor like always. I looked around. The closet. Each of us had a small, walk-in style closet on the far wall of our respective rooms. Taking another deep breath and still holding the wrench above my head like a caveman's club, I strode to the sliding doors and grabbed the handle, yanking it open with a scream of protest from its track. I forced aside the clothes hanging on the rack. Nothing. As I stared at the back wall, the feeling of being stared at came back, this time from almost directly behind me. I swear I could actually feel someone, or something, breathing down my neck. Moving on pure instinct, I pivoted around and swung the wrench with all the strength I had. At nothing. There was nothing and nobody behind me. What the actual hell was going on here, I wondered. As I stood there, feeling as though something had been behind me and had simply dematerialized out of existence when I turned and swung, I heard the sound of a key in the front door, then the laughs of Ty and what had to be his date as they stepped inside. "I'm telling you, you did great at darts, babe," Ty exclaimed. Both of them stopped and stared at me when they reached his bedroom door. I know I must have looked weird, standing in his room, wearing only a towel and holding a wrench. After a moment of silence, he spoke. Jimmy boy, what the hell are you doing?" I blinked a few times, trying to find my voice. Finally, I spoke. "I swear I heard someone here, man," I said, my voice trailing off slightly. I saw the two of them exchange nervous looks. "What do you mean, dude?" he asked, his eyes looking around. "I mean, I heard the exact same sound as last time, only the bathroom door swung open. I came out, thought I heard someone moving around in your room, and came in here," I replied, feeling only confusion and embarrassment sweep over me. I could tell he believed I had heard something, and to ease my worries, he had his date sit in the room, and together we swept the place, looking in every closet and under both beds, but we found no trace of anyone. I shook my head as he prepared to go into his bedroom. "I don't get it," I muttered softly. He patted me on the shoulder. "I think the bathroom door may just be a bit loose on its hinges, my dude," he said, trying to reassure me. "I'll check it out in the morning. Go dry yourself off and get some sleep." He punched me lightly on the arm. "And hey, no scary movies late at night for you, okay? You're starting to hear things go bump in the night for real." He let out a laugh, one which I mirrored, but didn't feel. The feeling of eyes on me had vanished, but the apartment still had an uneasy feeling. It stayed as I dried off, dressed into a pair of pajama bottoms, and climbed into bed. I could hear Ty in the next room, doing exactly what I figured he'd be doing with his date, and rolled my eyes. Hearing that shit gets old after a while. Still, I reached out, grabbed the remote and flicked on the small TV on my bureau for background noise. It took a very long time to drift off to sleep that night, and when I did, my dreams, nightmares actually, were of a dark, shadowy figure creeping slowly towards my ajar bathroom door, the sounds of the shower on spilling out from it. As it reached out to push the door open, I snapped awake, sitting straight up in bed with a sheen of sweat covering my face and body. For the next 2 weeks, I tried as hard as possible not to stay alone in that place. I only showered when I could hear my friend moving around in his room or out in the living room. Whenever I knew Ty was going out for any reason, I'd either find an excuse to join him or just go out and do something in town. The sense of being watched hadn't returned after that night, but I wasn't taking any chances. Something about the place just felt like it had changed. Something almost imperceptible, which I couldn't place. But it seemed to do the trick, as nothing weird or creepy happened. Then, one day, as I was sitting in a cafe sipping on a coffee, my phone rang. I pulled it out of my pocket and saw it was my boss calling me. Great, on my day off, I thought exasperatedly, then hit the button to answer it. Yeah? Instantly, I heard the gruff voice of Rick, my boss on the other end, yelling to someone else.
No, Stephen. How many times do I have to tell you counterclockwise?
His voice got louder as he must have put it back to his head.
James, you there?
He asked. Yep, I replied simply. He let out a sigh.
Look, I know today's your day off, but we're over here at the Bannerman property, and 2 of the pipes burst.
He let out a long groan of frustration.
One of them is real bad. I'm able to get one of them fixed, but our new employee...
His voice took on an undisguised tone of disgust.
He decided to make it worse by fucking the pipe up worse.
He finished, letting a moment of silence spread out before speaking again.
So, I apologise, but I need you to come in. You'll get paid overtime, of course.
I nodded, more to myself than anything, then let out a sigh of my own. Yeah, I'll be in. Just let me swing by my place and pick up my tools, I said.
Don't forget to quickly hit the shower before getting over here, James.
He quickly added.
You know old man Bannerman gets pissy about anyone not being freshly cleaned coming in here, due to being a germaphobe. So, I'll expect you to be here in 30 minutes.
And with that, he clicked off before I could say anything. Not that I could, anyways. At the mention of a shower, I felt a shiver run up my spine. I knew Ty was out. His bowling team was off in the next town on another tournament, which would mean I'd have to shower in the empty apartment. And that's something I really do not want to do. But I had no choice. If I just grabbed my tools and slipped into my jumpsuit, I'd get chewed out, first by old man Bannerman, and then Rick, for not following orders set down both by him and the man we'd contracted to repair and replace the pipes of his huge, sprawling mansion. Sighing, I paid for my coffee and drove back to the apartment. When I opened the door, I had a flash of panic seize through me. I thought the feeling I'd had before would come back as soon as I stepped inside. But the apartment felt normal, the cloudy light filtering in through the half-open kitchen and living room window blinds. I looked around, then shook my head. Stop being such a baby, Jimmy. There's nothing in here except you. You'll be fine. Just take the shower and book it. Feeling more resolved, I strode across to my room, gathered my undershirt and jumpsuit. For peace of mind, I also grabbed the same pipe wrench I'd held that night from the belt hanging over the edge of the couch and carried it into the bathroom with me, placing it on top of the pile of clothes sitting on the toilet lid. For a moment, I debated on just closing the bathroom door, but, like the previous feeling, shook it away and left it ajar. Ty should have fixed the hinges by now, anyways. I reached into the shower and turned the water on, waiting for it to warm up. After I saw the steam begin to rise out from over the curtain, I stepped inside and quickly beginning to scrub myself. I rinsed myself off with no problems, then grabbed the shampoo and lathered up my hair. As I scrubbed into my scalp, the soap began to drip into my eyes, obscuring my vision. That's when I heard the scraping sound come again. Only this time, it was much louder and more pronounced, than any time I'd heard it before. I felt a chill run up my spine despite the hot water flowing down over it. It came again just outside the bathroom door. I took a deep breath. "Tyler?" I called out, thinking the sound would stop as it had both times before. But this time, it didn't. Instead, I heard it scrape louder, almost on the bathroom door itself. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I saw the dark shape of the bathroom door swing open. And then, the bathroom lights flicked off, plunging me into darkness. There was still a little light filtering in from the living room, but everything was now in gloom. What the fuck? My heart was thundering in my chest as I slowly stepped back. I knew the distance from the edge of the tub to the toilet seat where my wrench lay was less than 2 feet. I could reach out and snatch it in a heartbeat. The scraping sound came again, loud as I'd ever heard it. It came from inside the bathroom somewhere, near the door. And then it stopped entirely. Aside from the sound of the water running, the apartment fell silent. Not a deadly silence, not a tension-filled silence, just silent. I stared for the longest time, what had to be only about 15 seconds, but what felt like 2 hours, at the dim outline of the open door. I saw nothing. I turned to pull the curtain next to me back, and I screamed. The dark outline of a figure, darker than any of the rest of the gloom, stood almost directly on the other side of the curtain, less than a foot from me. If it had been any closer, it would have been pressing into the curtain itself. It stood completely motionless, though I could tell it was looking in my direction, from the feeling washing over me in waves, sending a tsunami of chills through me. I couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman, or hell, if it was even human. It was a human-like figure, that was all I could tell. My breath came out in a ragged gasp, and I involuntarily let out a whisper. "Oh, fuck me." That was when it lunged at me. I let out a loud scream as the curtain pressed in against its weight, wrapping around it and subsequently me as I saw arms reaching out to grab me. The momentum of it smashing into me caused me to slip on the wet shower floor, and I went flying backwards. My head smashed into the tub's faucet, causing me to let out a cry of pain and stars to flash in my vision as I fell to the floor of the tub. It was still there as I could feel it on top of me, but it never let out a single sound. Something sharp jabbed into my leg, and I let out another scream at the sudden explosion of pain coming from my thigh. Another jammed into my shoulder, and I kicked out at the dark figure inches from my face through the curtain. I felt it impact something, but it seemed to have no effect. Another stab of pain came from my shoulder as whatever it was using, a weapon or claws, jammed into the wound it had already made. I kept screaming as I thrashed around, trying to jam myself into a position where I could reach out. I heard furious knocking coming from my front door, but it sounded like it was a mile away. "Help me!" I screamed as loudly as I could, still lashing out. Just as I began to feel woozy, I felt my hand brush the edge of the toilet seat, and with it, the cold metal handle of my wrench. Grabbing it as hard as I could, I swung out with all my remaining strength into what had to be the head of the thing. It seemed to stumble a bit at the blow, and I used that precious second to wrench myself out from underneath it, tumbling over the edge of the tub and onto the bathroom floor. I heard it thrashing about with the fallen shower curtain, furiously tearing at it in an attempt to get at me. But I was stumbling to my feet, noting as I did the amount of blood falling to the floor. I struggled to the front door as I heard it finally break free, crashing back onto the bathroom floor, but still remaining silent. I unlocked the door and tore it open, revealing the concerned face of my next-door neighbour. When he saw my condition, his face paled. Before I had a chance to say anything, I yelled, "I'm being attacked. It's in there," pointing back towards the bathroom. grabbing me, he pulled me into his open apartment door, slamming it closed and locking it. He quickly brought me a bathrobe and called the police. As he did, I could hear the sounds of it tearing through the apartment, doing God only knows what. It stayed that way until I heard the wail of sirens coming down the road, at which point I heard everything fall silent in my apartment. A few moments later, I heard the thundering of steps pound up the stairs to the second floor, followed by the yell of the officers. After a few minutes, my neighbour and I heard the hard knock at his door.
Police.
I was helped to an ambulance where I was taken to the hospital. In addition to splitting open my scalp on the faucet, I've been cut up pretty bad, though by what, the doctors couldn't tell me. They couldn't even tell themselves. It's the damnedest thing, one of them told me as they sewed the wounds closed. If it hadn't been for the fact you'd seen a person, I would have said that you'd been attacked by an animal. These look like puncture wounds from claws. The police never found a trace of what had attacked me. I already knew they wouldn't. It wasn't a man who'd attacked me. It hadn't even been human. The case is still open to this day, though I've long since stopped getting updated calls from the detectives in charge of the case. Tyler and I moved out of the apartment as soon as I left the hospital. He chose to stay at his new girlfriend's house while I recovered. He's under the belief I was attacked by an intruder, as is everyone else I know. I just say that whenever anyone asks about it. It's easier that way than trying to explain what I know won't be believed. That's why I'm posting this here. I just feel the need to have to tell someone what actually happened to me that day. This is a place I know I'll be believed, or at least I won't be called nuts for it. That figure simply appeared on the other side of the curtain. I never saw it cross the room, and I know, even in the dark, I would have. And even then, nothing human could possibly be that silent. I also know someone else moved into that apartment since then, though I don't know who they are. I pray they won't ever end up receiving a visit from whatever that thing was. The two of us are now renting a nice, relatively cheap 2-bedroom house miles away from that place. I've never felt the sensation of being watched again, and I've thankfully never heard the scraping sound. At least, in my waking hours. I still hear it in my dreams though. I still see that shape standing just on the other side of the curtain in the dark. It will likely stay there until the day I'm on my deathbed. I always feel tense now whenever I step into the bathroom to wash myself, but I've thankfully always felt safe in this house. I don't shower with my door ajar though, not anymore. I make sure it's closed and firmly locked before I undress and hop in. I've always felt safe in my new place, but I'm not taking any chances, because I don't know if it's trapped in that apartment or if it can leave whenever it wants. I just want to thank J.L. Goodwin 1990 for allowing me to narrate this story. If you liked what you heard here, show the author some love. I'll leave a link for the original story in the description below. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare.